Welcome to Neuronutrition Nuggets, the segment where I talk about everything nutrition, research, psychological science, and the brain. So my name is Annika. I'm an ADHD nutrition research expert and science communicator, meaning this is what I love and want to tell all y'all about. If you are listening to the podcast, be sure to hit that follow button, or if you're listening on YouTube, hey, just hit that subscribe button to make sure that you stay on top of everything that I talk about. So today I wanted to talk about the difference between an elimination diet and a healthy diet for ADHD. The thing is, there was this person called Dr. Mark Hyman. If you know him, you might actually, if you are in the wellness space. However, he is essentially a well-known wellness grifter, meaning that he says a lot of things to get you to buy things from him that are not necessarily rooted in science and rather rooted in fear. The reason why I say this is because he did an Instagram post, a LinkedIn post, and it was on a research paper about the elimination diet for ADHD. It was based on the 2011 INCA study, which is one of the most groundbreaking research studies we have for ADHD nutrition research. It was one of the first ones that actually looked at what's called the few foods diet, which is it's a little complicated, but essentially it gets rid of a lot of different types of foods in general and then reintroduces them later on. So essentially, like I said, it's an elimination style diet. And Dr. Mark Hyman, he looked at it and completely misrepresented the statistics and misled so many people about what the study actually said. So he said that there were 100 kids and they are all on the elimination diet, and then 78% of them reduced their symptoms. When in reality, when we actually read through it, we find that only 50 of them were on the elimination diet, 50 of them were on the control diet, which was basically just them not doing anything different. And then the kids, 9 of them didn't complete the study, so there were only 41, and 32 out of the 41 did. And that statistic there is the 78% that he's probably talking about. However, when they reintroduced the foods, what they found was that 19 of them relapsed, meaning that the elimination diet was the thing that actually helped their ADHD symptoms, which means 19 out of the 41 people improved with the elimination diet, which is about 46%. And so seeing that's a huge difference between saying 78% improved and 46% improved, right? And the reason for this, I don't know why he shared this misleading topic. It's likely that he is piggybacking from a lot of the influence that he's going to be getting from it. And that's something that we just want to make sure we are very aware of. And we don't want to fall for a lot of fear-based messaging. We want to look at what the actual research says. Going back a little bit, I know some people might have some questions about why I would say that only the 19 improved versus the 32. The reason for this is because this study had a lot of confounding variables. It was a great preliminary study, but it wasn't blinded, so the teachers and the parents knew for sure who had the elimination diet versus who was the control. There was a lot of expectation effects going on. Honestly, it had a lot of falling through. And so we want to take the most conservative answer possible, meaning that the people who likely improved, like the ones who relapsed after having the foods reintroduced, those people were the ones who actually benefited from the elimination style diet. And the people who didn't relapse after having those foods reintroduced, it was likely more the parents and the teachers expected the kids to have been getting better. And we'll talk about that a little bit in this TRACE study that was honestly one of the best studies out there on ADHD and nutrition research. So let's talk about the TRACE study. So back in 2023, it was released. It was honestly one of the best studies, like I said before. So they had not just controls, which were the people who had care as usual, so the CAU, which is essentially having psychoeducation and trialing medication. So they had that group, which is the control, and then they had a group of a healthy diet. So they were taught how to actually use the Netherlands' dietary guidelines for their children and how to follow the dietary guidelines. And then the last was the elimination style diet, where they eliminated all common allergens such as wheat, soy, And they also reduced or eliminated high histamine foods or histamine-inducing foods, including those like food colorings and food dyes and some preservatives as well. And then for some reason, because a lot of the people want to just like double check, make sure that even though the research says that sugar doesn't increase ADHD symptoms, we want to like cover all the bases. So they did have the kids reduce their sugar as well. So those are the three different groups that the kids were in. So there were also a doubling of the participants. So instead of just 40 kids who completed the study in both of the, the 40 kids completed the elimination style diet, and about 40 completed the regular diet in the 2011 INGA study. But then in the 2023 TRACE study, over 80 kids in both groups, which was incredible. And then in the care as usual, it was about 50 kids. So already we have more participants, which means that our alpha power, or that thing that helps us know for sure if this was a true or false experience, is increased, meaning that we can actually take more inference out of this study. So the really interesting thing that came out of the study was after the 5 weeks of the elimination diet or the healthy diet implementation, we actually found that both of them were able to stick to them at approximately the same rate. So it was about 90% for both of them. The kids were able to follow those diets. When we looked at the elimination style diet, however, we found that only 34% of the kids improved their ADHD symptoms by at least 30%. So when they were measuring improvement, they had a measurement of improving by 30%. A full response would be improvements of 30% by both the parent and the teacher ratings. And then a partial response was improvements by just one or the other, and not having any decline in their ADHD symptoms. And by decline, I mean exacerbation. So when we looked at that, only 34 to 35% of the kids improved statistically significantly of their symptoms. However, when they compared it to the healthy diet, 51% of the kids improved with the ADHD healthy diet, which is incredible. That is amazing, because essentially what it's saying is that for 50% of kids, just simply following the dietary recommendations could improve their symptoms by 30% at minimum. Some of them may have experienced more. They just only measured saying yes, they had a partial response or a full response. That's incredible to just say, right? Holy moly. The thing is, that was actually really interesting here as well was when they compared the healthy diet to the care as usual. The care as usual was still more effective. However, it was slightly comparable. The full response, so the improvements by both the parent and the teacher, the care as usual improved the full response a lot more than the healthy diet. And then the healthy diet improved the full response a lot more than the elimination diet. However, what's really interesting here is that the care as usual, when we compared it both the full and the partial, it was pretty comparable to the healthy diet. So is this saying that we should not do care as usual? No. We definitely want to make sure that the kid has access to psychoeducation, has access to medication, because we know that for 70% of people, it is actually effective. And we want to help them learn how to actually embrace the dietary recommendations, because that could also help reduce some of their symptoms by at least 30%. So 1 out of 2 kids could improve their symptoms by 30%. That is incredible, right? And I think that's the thing that's missing from this conversation a lot. And it might be a product of the diet culture that we're in, right? We want to focus on what is bad. And it makes us feel better by taking out foods. We feel like something is better when we take something out because we have this just like negative mindset as human beings. And so when we think like, oh, I just need to follow the dietary recommendations, like that just doesn't sound like it's going to help as much. And that was actually a finding that they had. What they found was that the parents expected the elimination diet to work more. But when they compared the teacher ratings, so the teachers were blinded, they had no idea whether the kid was doing the elimination diet or the healthy diet. The teachers were more likely to say that the kid was regressing when the kid was on the elimination diet than when the kid was on the healthy diet. So that's something else to consider too. So as a parent, if you are having your kid do an elimination style diet, know that your bias is likely actually not reality when we look at the statistics here. So essentially, your kid may just not actually be improving, but rather regressing in their ADHD symptoms, especially not at home where maybe they are feeling a lot more pressure to be perfect because of the elimination style diet. So that is something just to be aware of if you are a parent and you want to help your kid through an elimination diet. This is where I always recommend just simply following the dietary recommendations. I will say the dietary recommendations are different from what we tend to expect as a human. Because, I don't know, we have a lot of this conditioning out there, right? Thinking we just need to eat breakfast, our cereal, right? So cereal is fantastic, would recommend, but we want to make sure it's balanced. That's the difference between having a quote-unquote healthy diet, following the dietary guidelines, versus simply eating what we think is healthy. The other area that's hard here is the recommendations are so much more than we think that we can eat. So for an adult, our goal is actually 5 servings of vegetables a day, 3 servings of fruit a day. How many of us are actually doing this? Probably none of us, right? And that is where we want to make sure we are having successive small steps toward what we want to be doing with our diet, rather than trying to just do it all at once. Because let's be honest, it's not going to work. We, especially ADHDers, we think we can do things. We think we can just go all in, and then we burn out super quickly, and then we just go right back to our old habits. It's really important to make sure that we are actually taking small steps. So if you only eat 1 fruit a day, just try to do 2 fruit a day. Or if you barely like any fruits or vegetables, hopefully you like fruit. If you like fruit, I said this before in my What Do I Eat as an ADHDer who knows all the research, fruit can replace your vegetables in the short term. So if you love fruit but hate vegetables, try, I know it's hard, but maybe make a smoothie that has 1 vegetable in it, like spinach, and then the rest of it's fruit, okay? So that is something that we want to just understand for ourselves. Where are we actually at, and how can we actually improve in the slightest, not in the most? Because when we try to do the most, we never end up where we want to be. Now, the last thing I will say about the elimination diet is that it has potential to help, specifically for kids who have sleep issues on top of their ADHD. So what they found for some reason was the kids who had the healthy diet did not improve their sleep issues. However, the kids on the elimination style did. So it could be some interesting interactions with perhaps some allergens with ADHD. We do know that there is some sensitivity to histamine for some kids with ADHD. There is some genetic interesting things with the histamine receptors. And so it is just a lot of trial and error, honestly, at the end of the day. I will say that doing an elimination style diet can be very, very hard on a child, and it has potential to induce worse food symptoms in the long run. So as people with ADHD, we have a significantly higher predisposition to developing an eating disorder. And this is another reason why I just genuinely don't like having people go on elimination diets if we can help it, because at the end of the day, not only can they induce nutritional deficiencies, they can also just make us have more fear around food. And for a lot of us with ADHD, we already have a lot of fears around food, and it can just exacerbate them. So we want to try to prevent that as much as possible, and having less moral talk around food and more just what can it do that is good for us, And I think that's the other hard part about elimination style diets. Like I said, it feels like it's going to do some really great things for us because we're taking things out, right? And it feels like when we take things out, we're going to reduce our inflammation because things are not inflaming us as much. However, when we take these things out and we're not adding in the other things that are going to be really good for us, such as all the anti-inflammatory foods, specifically fiber. Fiber is the best anti-inflammatory food you can get out there because it actually reduces our inflammatory markers, whereas taking out some of these other allergens, well, if you're allergic to it, then yes, it will decrease your inflammatory markers. So that's very important to note. However, the most important thing here is making sure that we are incorporating the foods that are actually going to be helping us in the long run. And as ADHD, I know the long run is not our expertise. We really like those short-term satisfying goals, and that's another reason why the elimination diet tends to be something we might want to gravitate toward because it might give us more immediate results. Like, to be clear, following a healthy diet, not only is it difficult, it also takes a long time to work. For instance, it takes at least 6 to 8 weeks, about 2 months, for us to notice any differences. So just know that when you start working on incorporating more fruits, vegetables, grains, beans, nuts, seeds, more protein into your diet and reducing some of those sodas and heavy sugars, those are things that honestly, it takes a long time. So, end of the day, we really just want to follow the dietary recommendations. And the dietary recommendations recommend that we eat plenty of protein, plenty of fiber, and reduce our consumption of sodas and ultra-processed meats and other types of ultra-processed foods. So when I talk about ultra-processed, what I'm really talking about is deep fat fried foods, specifically lots of things that have a lot of saturated fat. We want to reduce our saturated fat intake. And it's a little complicated. So obviously there's some really important healthy fats that have a lot of saturated fat in it. So take dairy, for example. It's just complicated. And I feel like I would have to talk about this for a long time in a different episode. But just for the moment, as you look at your labels, just look and see how much added sugar is in it. How much added saturated fat is in it. And perhaps make some decisions based on that. At the end of the day, though, I would always recommend working with a registered dietitian if you're in the States. I'm not sure what their name is in other countries. I know that I think in the UK, nutritionist is the protected term. Just make sure that the person you're working with is somebody who knows what they're doing and ideally is a neurodivergent affirming one, because they should be able to help you in a way that's not going to induce all those distressing aspects that come with food and ADHD. All right, so thank you so much for listening to all of this. If you are watching on Patreon, hey, I appreciate everything you do for me and supporting my work. If you don't know what my Patreon is, I have a NutriMind community, and it's the best way that you can actually get access to information to learn how to improve your ADHD using nutrition, using research. So there's a lot of information out there online, and not a lot of it is backed up by evidence. That is why I created my NutriMind community, where people have access to not just the research in easily digestible form, but also regular updates from me, as well as a community space where we just have a lot of conversations. You can directly DM me and I will answer. So thank you again so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you next time.